Welcome back to this wonderful story by SamadiW. This is the last chapter. It will again be in 2 parts, but I really hope you enjoyed the story, and if you did, hit that subscribe button and follow along. There is a lot more to come, especially for October. There's a lot of exciting things planned, and I would be very happy if you would follow along for this. And now, without further ado, to the story. Always Mine by SamadiW. Chapter 17. Part 1. Draco hardly got any sleep. He could not let go of the feeling, he just couldn't. The child looked so much like him. Too much. He had to find her. He made up his mind to ask Potter first thing in the morning. Hermione put her precious son to sleep and kissed his sweet forehead. Switching off the light, she picked up the glass of wine she had left in the kitchen and sipped the red liquid. Her thoughts went back to the man she saw today. The way he stared at Ryan, a shiver ran down her spine. He was still strikingly handsome, even more so now. His suit hung on him like a second skin. She felt the heat rise within her as she remembered how his kisses and touch had been burned into her skin and memory. Hermione. Harry tried to get her attention as they sat across each other at a deserted muggle coffee shop in the early hours of the morning. It was their escape from the wizarding world. It helped that they had the best chocolate cake in London. Frosting so thick it made you lick the fork more than once. Harry pressed. Malfoy is no fool. He knows something is out of place. Ryan looks too much like him to go unnoticed. Hermione sighed and stared at the wall behind Harry's head. Harry took a big bite from his chocolate cake and continued. He has no idea where you are, but he might start looking, and I dare say if he starts, he will find you. He grinned. Malfoy isn't the arrogant twat he was at school. She poked her pudding and frowned into the fluffy mix of chocolate. She knew more about Draco than he did about her. Harry's tone softened. Why don't you speak to him or find someone else? I hate to see you wasting your life away. For 3 years, she dedicated her life to Ryan while holding on to memories of Malfoy. She stepped back to attention at once and waved her hand gracefully. Expecto Patronum. A beautiful white wolf took form, did a small circle round the cafe and vanished. Harry stared in amazement. After all this time, your Patronus is still the same as his? He stared into her coffee miserably, choked back a sob, and muttered in anguish, Always, Harry. Harry nodded, reached over, and squeezed his friend's hand. Draco tried unsuccessfully to get Potter's attention, but he seemed elusive. Making up excuses to speak with him proved futile, and Weasley and Potter were sent away on assignment. Fuck! It would be a week before he returned. He was getting increasingly frustrated. It was eating away at him. The uncertainty was killing him. It was a normal day, but it looked like rain. Hermione put the raincoat around Ryan and buttoned him up. He whizzed around her while she packed his lunch. Taking the bag in one hand and Ryan's small hand in one, she went to her car. Tossing the case files in the back seat and settling Ryan in his car seat, Hermione got behind the wheel with a sigh. She had a long day of court proceedings and client visits. Being an assistant to a prominent lawyer was exhausting at times, but it was what she wanted to be. Hermione pulled out of her driveway and drove along the partially empty road, listening to the radio, humming to herself and fingers tapping the steering wheel lightly. The light turned green, and she slowly pulled in front. There was hardly any time to react as the pickup truck hit the side of her car like a battering ram. Her body hit the steering wheel, and she slumped over the gearbox. Dazed and bleeding, through a haze, she saw people gather around the car. Vision blurry. What happened? She let out a blood-curdling scream. Oh my God, Ryan! Almost leaping out of her car, she clutched onto her side and yanked open the back door. Her son was still buckled into his car seat, but he was not responsive. It was then Hermione noticed a patch of blood on his head get bigger dampenings his platinum blonde hair. A kind bystander phoned emergency services, and the paramedics appeared on the scene within a few minutes. They carried Ryan gently to the ambulance, taking his vitals throughout. Terrified and alone, Hermione held her precious son's hand tightly as they rushed him to the nearest hospital. She was fucking witch. How could she have left her wand at home on this crucial day? Hermione cursed herself. The Muggle life was obviously getting to her. Hours later, Harry, Ginny, Ron, and her parents sat with Hermione in the waiting room of the Muggle hospital until the surgery was over. It stopped crying. There were no tears left to shed. Instead, she stared deadpan at the doors to the operation theatre. The little boy needed surgery because of internal injuries and bleeding. She had refused any help for herself until her son was out of harm's way. Ginny told her frankly, "Ryan needs you whole, Hermione." The fiery redhead frog marched her to an empty room and used magic to heal her injuries, but the faint outline of scars remained. Harry sat with Hermione. He held her as they waited for the surgery to finish. After what felt like a lifetime later, the doctor came out. Hermione got to her feet quickly and approached the doctor with her friends in tow. The doctor looked exhausted, his face solemn. "We have stopped the internal bleeding, but he has lost a lot of blood." Took a deep breath and delivered the news. "Ryan needs a transfusion at once, and his blood type is rare. I'm afraid we don't have it in our blood bank." Hermione staggered, and Ron held onto her from behind. Fresh sobs tore through her at the helplessness of the situation. Once they moved Ryan to a room, Hermione stood over him. A beautiful baby boy had tubes coming out of his nose and mouth. Why was this happening? She had Ron and Harry enter. They came to stand by her and soothingly rubbed her back. Ron said in concern, "We should take him to St. Mungo's." She glanced at him and replied, "I thought of it, but he can't sidelong apparate with me in his condition." Her voice cracked and fresh tears fell down her exhausted face. "He could die before we even get there." Her son was beyond the help of magic. Harry came close and put his arm around her shoulder. "He needs blood, Hermione. We all tested, and none of us is a match. You need to tell Malfoy." He added gravely, "This is bigger than both of you. Your son needs you and his father." Desperate and scared, Hermione wept against Harry's shoulder and made the decision. It was time Draco found out about their child. "Will you come with me, Harry?" He asked softly between sobs. "I will be right by your side, Hermione," Harry replied reassuringly. It was late, and none of them knew where Malfoy would be, probably holed up in his flat with a glass of fire whiskey and a book. Deciding to wait till morning to spring the news on the unsuspecting ex-boyfriend, Harry, Ginny, and Ron left. Hermione settled on the chair, and before she knew it, she drifted off into an uncomfortable slumber. Arriving early at the hospital, Harry gently woke Hermione. It was only 8:30. He knew Malfoy would be in. The man was extremely punctual. Hermione looked and felt like horror. The side of her face was puffy, and she had dark circles under her eyes. Going into the small bathroom the hospital offered, she fixed herself up as best as she could. She changed her outfit to a casual summer dress and ran wet fingers through her wild yet short hair to make it appear sleeker and tamed. After ensuring Ryan was okay with her mother, Hermione reluctantly nodded at Harry, and they apparated right outside the Ministry of Magic. Harry squeezed her hand and reassured her. "You can do this, Hermione." Staring at the imposing building, she pressed her lips together, nodded, and went in. Harry walked into the department first. Draco looked up in surprise, but deciding not to beat around the bush, he opened his mouth to ask about Hermione. "Good morning, Potter. Have you?" He stopped mid-sentence when he spotted her standing behind Potter. Draco looked her over and took in her frightened and miserable face. She seemed troubled. He took in the faint lines of fresh gashes, and she looked visibly pale. Something was wrong. Harry exchanged a sad look with Draco, giving Hermione a small smile. Without another word, he exited the room, closed the door behind him, and cast a silencing charm over the small office. Draco stared at the woman in front of him, took in the small details, and stood frozen on the spot. There was so much he wanted to tell her. He gathered his courage and opened his mouth to speak, but she flung herself at him. Her arms went around his waist, pulling him close to warm her body while she sobbed into his shirt. Draco stood still, letting her do whatever she wished to him, but it was too much to bear. He pulled her closer to his body and stroked her hair. He let his long fingers stroke her hair and took in her smell. He finally found his voice. "Hermione, what's the matter?" Her voice was barely audible, a mere whisper, but he heard it loud and clear. "Our son needs you, Draco." A dark pit opened, a never-ending abyss, and swallowed him whole. He was falling. Threads of sanity snapped. He had a son? It all made sense. Draco knew deep down the child he saw in Diagon Alley was his. He slowly broke away from her and stared into her face. She looked defeated, her head hung low. "What happened to him?" Draco asked, terrified of her answer. He struggled to keep fear out of his voice. Was he to lose his son before he even met him? Hermione clumsily wiped off the tears and replied, "We were in a car accident. He lost a lot of blood. He needs a transfusion." "We?" That would explain the scars and dried blood on her neck. His son needed his blood. That's why she was here. Draco ran his fingers through his hair in deep thought. There was nothing to think about. They needed him, and he was not about to fail her again. Without a single hesitation, Draco grabbed hold of Hermione's hand. "Let's go, now!" Shocked to her core, she stared at him. His quick tug pulled her back to reality, and they urgently ran from his office. Harry jumped to his feet in alarm as they ran past. Hermione tried to study Draco's face. He hadn't said another word. He didn't scold her for keeping their son a secret. His face was full of concern and pain. They appeared right outside the hospital, and she didn't let go of his hand, nor did he try to pull it away. They reached their son's room, and Hermione was about to rush in when Draco stopped. He stood frozen by the door, staring at what he could of his son. Monitors and tubes surrounded the small boy. Draco clutched his chest and tried to control his breathing. This was not how he planned on meeting his child. Hermione took in his stoic state, gently cupped his face, and turned it towards her. Her soft hands guided him. He went without question, still in a daze. They moved to stand by the side of their son's bed, firmly holding hands. He looked down at a beautiful little boy lying on the bed, fighting for his life. Draco slowly reached over, touched his son's fragile head with trembling fingers, and then moved his hand down to the sheet covering him. It was overwhelming. He cried over his son's sleeping form. It was desperate and helpless, and came from deep within him as loud sobs swept through his entire body and soul. Hermione stepped back, her back hitting the wall. Leaning against the hard, cold hospital wall, she watched regretfully as Draco cradled their unconscious son. Her decision to keep Ryan a secret from his father had been wrong. How could she have done this to him? The more she watched, the more convinced she was of what a horrible decision it had been. The doctor walked in unannounced, taking in the emotional scene unraveling before him. He cleared his throat, and Hermione walked up to Draco and placed a trembling hand on his shoulder. He glanced away, wiped his tears, and got to his feet. "This is the father, I presume, Miss Granger?" The doctor inquired softly with compassion. Hermione nodded weakly and looked at Draco through tear-stained eyelids. Ever the Malfoy, Draco took charge and stepped forward. "Take what you need from me, and do whatever is necessary to save our son," he said it boldly and firmly. The doctor nodded and asked, "Of course, please come with me." He gave Hermione a weak but reassuring smile and followed the doctor out. Hermione pulled up the chair set by Ryan's bed and adjusted the sheet to cover her small legs. Out of exhaustion, she rested her head on the bed and tried to grasp the reality of the situation. After a few minutes, she felt a soft hand on her shoulder. Rubbing her eyes, Hermione looked up to see her mother and father smiling down at her. She quickly rose to hug her mother, holding her tightly while she cried again. Her father patted her back calmly. "Draco agreed to come, then?" her mother asked softly. "He did not hesitate, Mum," Hermione replied through sobs. "He is a good man," her dad added, looking over his bruised grandson. Hermione weakly nodded in agreement. To be continued.